podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
This episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the easiest way to play season-long fantasy football. Underdog Fantasy sets your perfect lineup at the end of each week, so no management and no Tuesday nights on the waiver wire. All you do is the most fun part. Draft the best team and win cold, hard cash. Play now at UnderdogFantasy.com, and they'll match your first deposit up to $100 if you use code SPOTIFY.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Leaving out the avocado in your salad to save money is not good for morale or your fiber intake. Luckily, State Farm knows the value of the little things. It's why they've got options, like insuring your home and ride with surprisingly great rates on both. Because you shouldn't have to give up what you love for great insurance. For surprisingly great rates, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com for a quote today.
Welcome to the 1865 Match Report with me, Rich Ferraro. It's Saturday the 3rd of August, and it's the day when Forest disappointingly lost 3-2 at home to Bournemouth after leading by 2 goals at half-time. Coming up, we'll be talking to our man at City Ground, we'll get a view from the away end, and we'll have a roundup of the deadline day transfers. But first of all, the team news for Forest. And there were a couple of changes from the defeat at Man City. We had Dean Henderson in goal, a back three of Worrell, Cook and McKenna, with Williams and Renan Lodi at wing-backs. Ryan Yates was partnered by Cheikhou Kouyate in the middle of the park, and we had the front three of Gibbs, White, Johnson and Lingard. Now Baz, welcome. You were at your first match of the season at the City Ground. Obviously the second half and the result weren't good, but before we get into that, how was the Premier League matchday experience for you?
First thing I noticed was Freed from Desire has joined the pre-match song playlist, which made me quite happy. It was good to start with. It was very, very warm, obviously, for this time of year, and it was nice. It was my first Premier League visit since the 20th century.
Well, yes. Okay. So the first half, on the face of it, Forest went in at half-time leading 2-0. The first goal came from a header from Cheikhou Kouyate, and the second one on the stroke of the interval with a penalty from Brennan Johnson. Now, this could be a bit of revisionism, but I've seen a few people saying, well, we didn't really deserve to be in the lead at half-time, or certainly didn't deserve to be 2-0 up. So what do you think?
I wouldn't say we didn't deserve to be 2-0 up, because they were both good goals. But we didn't look fluent, and we did look like a team that didn't know each other. Against West Ham and against Spurs, we looked like the Steve Cooper's Forest side, but today we didn't look like that. In particular, I mean, I said in our group chat after 2 minutes or something, I said Lodi's now my new favourite player, and that's because there was a bit where Gibbs White was trying to clear the ball, ran into a load of Bournemouth players, so he did a back heel that found Lodi. Lodi did this beautiful crossfield ball to pick out Williams on the other side, and you could just see in that snapshot, you could see everything he was going to give the side. But then the rest of the half, you could see he hadn't played with us very much because he was bombing forwards, but he was timing his runs all wrong, so he wasn't able to receive the ball. Or when Williams was bombing forwards, Lodi wouldn't spot him and therefore couldn't get him the ball. So, and that was the case throughout the entire first half, and even worse in the second half.
Okay, and you mentioned, so let's just discount Man City, because I think we all agree that Erling Haaland is essentially a freak of nature. Man City are one of the best teams in the world, and we were always going to lose that, and it wasn't that big a surprise we got tanked. Let's discount that match. Let's think back to Tottenham, where we gave a very creditable performance, and essentially Harry Kane was the difference. And in that match, Forest played with the same kind of style and format with the front three, but no strikers. I guess one big difference was that Lewis O'Brien was in the middle of the park compared to Cheikhou Kouyate today. And they looked fluent, they looked dangerous, they looked as if they had some forward impetus. So what was the difference today?
Well, I mean, I would say, actually, Kouyate probably was our best player. I think the problem, and maybe it's where O'Brien is different, is both Kouyate and Yates were very, very mobile. But again, because they didn't know each other, they were both running at the same time, leaving a massive gap in the middle of the park, which in the second half, Bournemouth changed their formation to exploit, and that's why we went down the way we did. But that's what it comes down to. Is I think I was surprised against Spurs that we played the front three that we did. I was surprised to see it again today, because I think when you don't have a proper and a one-knee type player, then the ball just comes back. Those three were right up against their defence a lot of the time. So there was a big gap between them and the midfield. And then when they received the ball, they couldn't make it stick up there, so it would come straight back at us. And by then, Yates and Kouyate had moved out of position, so there was a big gap for them to run into. So we were giving them momentum even in the first half.
We'll come back to Bournemouth's tactical and formation changes in a little while. Just one thing about Kouyate getting a goal. Having bemoaned the quality of a lot of set-piece deliveries so far this season, Gibbs White had obviously been practising, hadn't he? Because that was a much better delivery. And also, I think it's fair to say, that was a really, really strong header from Kouyate, because he was running away from the goal and he used his neck and shoulder muscles to kind of put it powerfully into the goal. But just to counter that as well, I'm pretty certain that Gary O'Neill and the Bournemouth defence will be unhappy at the way they conceded it.
Well, yeah, I mean, from where I was, I just saw him rise up above everyone, and I mean, he's a tall lad, but he's no taller than, say, Billing. Billing was probably bigger than him.
Well, Billing's another freak of nature, though, isn't he?
So. But I mean, yes, for him to basically get a free header and be a foot above everyone else, I think, Bournemouth will be looking at themselves for that.
Yeah, and having talked about the difference between selecting Kouyate and O'Brien, I mean, one of the key differences is that Kouyate is basically a foot taller than O'Brien, isn't it? And bearing in mind, we've seen Bournemouth bully us over the last couple of years through extra height in the box and so on. So it's not hard to see why he's chosen to put Kouyate, Yates, Worrell, McKenna and Cook as kind of taller... I know Cook's not that big, but having the taller players... To not get bullied out of it physically.
But then that also then begs the question, why have three physically slight players up front when we've got bigger players that could deal with Bournemouth's defence better?
Well, quite. Okay, let's talk about the second goal. So, I mean, the thing that was most notable about it was the fact it took a full 5 minutes for VAR to make the decision. And even having made the decision, I have to say... Given some of the decisions about handballs made by VAR in recent weeks, I was a little bit sceptical about whether this is going to get awarded, just because the ball went across into the box. Bournemouth tried to clear the first ball. It came out to Nico Williams. He volleyed it, and Lloyd Kelly was going down. It hit both his hands, actually. To me, it was pretty clear cut that it hit his hands, but the question being... is that enough in this day and age? And so VAR kind of spent a bit of time umming and ahhing about whether it was a natural position, was he too close, could he avoid it, etc., etc.
I did read something saying that there was a possibility of an offside in the build-up as well.
Yes, so what I can tell you is that they did look to see if there was an offside. I think it was Johnson who was running in behind the back line. He was deemed to be onside. They got the lines out and everything, so that took another couple of minutes. And then after that, they went back to the handball, got the referee to go over to the monitor and have a look at it, which he kind of said, yeah, it was a handball, which is what I gave. Mm-hmm. But that took a full 5 minutes.
And no one got booked for it?
The goalkeeper got booked, I think, for dissent.
Well, no. So what was happening while VAR was going on, the Bournemouth players were busy scuffing the penalty spot.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, okay. They were making a right mess of it. And Gibbs White went to complain to the referee, and that's why the keeper got booked.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So, but having said that, the keeper was the only one who did get booked.
Yeah.
So, given that big delay, it was good to see that Brennan Johnson kept a cool head. Although I did say, when penalty went in, that's basically the same penalty that Harry Kane took against us last week, which Henderson saved. It was a similar height. It was going and it hit the side netting, which is what Kane's penalty was going to do. So maybe the difference is just that Henderson better prepared, more agile, a bit quicker than Bournemouth's goalkeeper Neto, who went the right way but didn't get there. Would you agree?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay. So at half-time, it was 2-0 to the Reds.
The 1865 match report.
The second half saw Bournemouth make a tactical change, and this, I think, is noticeable because I'm not sure that Scott Parker would have made this change, but he's not the manager anymore, and Gary O'Neill, having seen his team be beaten 9-0, he then oversaw a 0-0 draw away at Wolves, and today he made a tactical change, which was really, really important. So he brought on a right wing back and went to 3 at the back, and that made all the difference, didn't it? Because it meant that Bournemouth were matching us positionally, but they had that kind of, you were saying in the first half that Forest didn't quite have that cohesion, maybe as a result of having players playing with each other for the first time. Well, Bournemouth definitely did, didn't they?
Yeah, and the net result was, I mean, Yates was doing a little bit. I don't want to criticise him too much because a lot of the people in the stands were criticising him, and we know what happened when we criticised Yates last season. So, but he was doing a little bit of his headless chicken thing, not really knowing which part of the pitch he was supposed to be on, so he was just running from one place to the other.
Okay.
Kouyate, being a very mobile midfielder as well, was basically doing the work of both of them, and then Bournemouth matching us, then when what they were doing was they were positioning themselves to block our passing lines completely blocked our passing lines. So we couldn't do anything in possession, and then they were dominating the centre of the pitch, and that's basically what put them back in the game.
Okay, so let's talk about the first goal that Bournemouth scored, because it will lead us on to another topic of conversation. So the ball broke, Forest cleared the first ball, and then Jesse Lingard went to challenge, I think, with Lewis Cook. It was maybe about 15 yards into the Forest half, and Cook basically shrugged off Lingard, played the ball across to Philip Billing. Billing had he's one of those players, you give him a couple of yards of time and space, he can hit a rocket, and that's exactly what he did. So I've got no issue with the shot being excellent and being too powerful for Henderson to get near. I do think there was too much space for Billing. Really, we should have been closing him down quicker, and that's a criticism I've had of Forest, in that those gaps between the back line and the central midfield allow the opposing midfielders to run into it. But the main thing I want to talk about is Lingard got shrugged off, and you talked about Yates running around being a bit of a headless chicken. Is that because the Forest front three, the 3 mobile attacking midfielders playing as forwards, really, one of those at any one time needed to be dropping into the middle of the park?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes. Well, I mean, I've not looked at it back. I was at the game where I was where I sit near the halfway line, and what you were saying about the space, from my memory of it, basically there was our back 3. Then there was 10 yards of empty space, and then Billing with the ball, and then our midfield and our attackers beyond that. So there was at least 15 yards of empty space for Bournemouth to play in. And so Billing, basically, he could take his time, and it was a beautiful shot. But it is exactly that. Is if we're playing that front 3 and then 2 behind them, those two, you need one of those 2 at least to sit.
Well, yes, so one of the criticisms about the old-fashioned 4-4-2 is that you've just got 3 lines of players. And that's exactly what Forest had today by playing quite a flat 3-4-3. And what was noticeable is on the Radio Nottingham commentary, Brian Laws did say after Billing's goal, well, Lingard's got to drop in, and then he said, and now he's obviously been asked to drop in a bit more. But the danger of playing those 3 is that there's a lot of similarities in the way they play, in that they're all front foot players, pacey, looking for a pass, looking to get in behind. Whereas last season, I'm not saying this would have worked in the Premier League, but last season Zinkernagel he was a workhorse as well as playing in that number 10 role. So he wasn't necessarily the most effective number 10 at times where you'd get frustrated because his...
And he wasn't a great defender, but he did the work. Yeah, he put himself in those positions.
And so I think that is one of the problems that you have with playing those front three attacking midfielders. They're all trying to do the same thing, and none of them are dropping in and helping out.
Yeah, and I think the big mistake today, and I'm sure we'll come to this later, was playing those front three. Mm-hmm. I think a different choice there would have made all the difference in the game.
Okay, let's move on, because you'd mentioned Yates, and Yates was at the heart of the equalising goal from Bournemouth, but quite inadvertently. So, again, we're talking about first balls and second balls. The first ball was repelled. Morgan Gibbs-White went up for a header on the edge of the box, and it wasn't malicious, but he did get clattered a bit. Ref didn't see anything wrong with it. The ball broke. Yates blocked the shot, and he took it in the face. So, Gibbs-White, the foul wasn't given. Replay shows quite clearly, it wasn't a bad foul, but it was clearly the Bournemouth player, kind of the way he went in. You'd imagine that most refs would give that foul most times, but it wasn't given. Yates blocked the ball. He had to have treatment. When you have treatment, you have to go off the pitch. After the ball deflected off his face, it went out for a corner. So we've got one of our 6 foot plus players who's off the pitch when we're defending a corner. We all know the law's there for a reason. We also all know that it can disadvantage a defending team, and I think it's pretty fair to say that, once again, poor defending, because Steve Cook let Lloyd Kelly go. Kelly headed it back into the penalty spot, and Dom Solanke with a really good scissor kick finish. But Yates would have been there, wouldn't he?
Yeah, that was exactly... I'm not going to complain about Yates not being on the pitch. I'm not going to complain about the foul not being given, because from where I was, it was like it looked 50-50.
Yeah.
That's fair enough.
I needed a replay to see it. Yeah.
And when Yates went down, one of the things I did notice was 2 Forest players immediately came over and shouted at the referee and called him over. So whatever it was, whether it was bleeding or something, or he had a nosebleed or whatever it was, the Forest players thought it was serious. Mm-hmm. And then we were quite surprised, because of that seriousness of it, that they then gave the corner. But you can't complain at that, and that's the way it goes. But it was probably, and again, this is part of the same thing, which is that the team don't know each other. You would expect someone to be, hang on, who's taking Yates' role, and in a defensive set piece.
Yeah,
you'd expect someone, and you'd probably say that's probably Joe Worrell's job to make sure that someone's responsible for that.
So Worrell as the captain, and then experienced players like Cook and Kouyate. But I'm afraid to say that Cook was the one who he's the one who didn't track his man. He knows Lloyd Kelly well. He kind of helped bring him up for the last couple of years at Bournemouth, and he let him get away from him too easily. It wasn't difficult movement to track, but he just lost his man. Anyway, this isn't about throwing blame at individuals. It is a team issue, isn't it? So, 2-2. Did you think we were going to lose it at that point?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about a few other bits and pieces. So there were some substitutions made, as you'd expect. And one of the things that's kind of worth noting is that, having started with no strikers, as we have done a couple of times, we ended up bringing on the 2 number 9s in Awoniyi and Emmanuel Dennis. And it was... Did it make a difference? Did you see a tangible, not necessarily in terms of what those individual players did, but in terms of the style of play and what it did to Forest's shape?
Well, I thought, first of all, Awoniyi came on first for Lingard, which I thought didn't really help, because we still were playing like a front 3 up on their defence, although Awoniyi obviously has a bit more of a physical presence.
Yeah, and what I was hoping as well is, because Gibbs-White is a bit more beefy as well, that him dropping into the number 10 would mean that he
didn't really drop into the number 10, though. That's the thing. It kind of stayed the same shape.
So this is something that's worth noting for people who didn't see any of the match, is that having had that 3-4-3 shape, rather than the 3-4-1-2 that we've seen Forest play with so often last season, in the second half in particular, just like we saw in the second half at Man City, it became a sort of 3-4-2-1 with the midfield forming a box. So we had Kouyate and Yates as the deep ones, and then Lingard and Gibbs-White as the kind of more advanced players, but in a sort of a box shape, which meant that we had one man up front, which was Brennan for some of that time, and then Awoniyi a little bit later on. So slight change in shape, which was to counter the fact that Bournemouth had adopted that shape as well. So Bournemouth matched us, we tried to match them. Don't think it worked.
No, and I mean, I think I've read other people say about this box formation, part of the point of it is it's to give you pressing up front, to allow you to press up front. And that's probably why our attackers ended up level with their defenders, and we ended up with what this flat line. When Dennis came on, it did make a difference, but that's just because we had more physical prep. We basically, Awoniyi coming on basically took Jono out of the game completely. He's one of those who can drift out of games quite a lot, but you always expect the unexpected of him. But when Awoniyi came on, Jono just drifted. I don't think he even touched the ball after he came on. When Dennis came on, then we did turn into that sort of 1-2 up front. Yeah. And that their physical presence meant that we actually ended up just hoofing it long a lot of the time. We'd play it back to the back three, hoof it long, try it, knock it down, and then take it back to the back and then hoof it again.
And it's worth noting that Dennis came on in 85 minutes and I don't think he touched the ball before Bournemouth took the lead. So let's just talk about that goal. I don't want to dwell on it because it was the classic individual error. So McKenna on the touchline under pressure from Dom Solanke. 8 times out of 10 he hits it back to the goalkeeper, no problems. One of the other times he decides he's just going to hoof it into Rosed because and you can see in the replay, because of that pressure, he got his body shape all wrong, the ball got caught under his boot. It was a dribbler rather than a nice firm pass, which meant that Solanke got in behind. He played the ball in. Jadon Anthony had the freedom of the 6-yard box to put it past Henderson. And it's an awful goal to concede, but one of those which you kind of say is... I mean, it felt inevitable, didn't it?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It's not really McKenna's fault because we all knew they were going to get a third.
Yeah, OK. But it meant that as well, we had 3 minutes plus stoppage time to go, at which point it was McKenna and Cook more or less went up front and it was hoofing it, which is something that Steve Cooper was very reluctant to do last season, and maybe it's just one of those needs-must type things today. It's the Premier League. It's against a team who may or may not end up in a similar part of the table to us at the end of the season. And also, it's important to try and avoid 3 defeats in a week. So it didn't work. Let's just put it, say that. And it meant that the match ended 3-2 to Bournemouth.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Switch to Metro by T-Mobile and save more. Get the new iPhone SE now with 5G at the lowest price in prepaid. Just $99.99.
I post a lot. And thanks to the iPhone SE with 5G and advanced 4K camera, I'm snapping and sharing while my followers are smashing the like button.
Switch and get the iPhone SE for just $99.99. Only at Metro. Save more versus national prepaid brands. Limited time offer. In-store only. Price for 64GB model with eligible port. $60 plan and ID. See 5G device coverage and access details at metrobyti.mobile.com.
OK, so very, very disappointing result there, Baz. And we talked a lot about some of the tactical issues and team selection issues. As a pod, you and I have been podcasting for a long, long time, and we've long accepted that no matter who the manager is, there's always going to be times that you're going to criticise the team selection, you're going to criticise the tactics. But it seems odd that it worked for most of the match against Tottenham, but then against Tottenham we barely got a shot on target. And then Man City, you'd have thought there's nothing to lose by playing a number 9. Today, against potentially another team who will be in the same mini-league as us, why isn't he playing centre forward?
I really don't understand it. I can kind of understand playing those 3 if you're going to get the opportunity to pass the ball about and ping it and work spaces through the opposition defence. You're not going to be able to do that against Bournemouth. We played them enough times to know they're going to be quite physical and they're going to stop us. And so I don't understand why you'd go with that tactic. I think we had a problem with the front three because of that, and we had a problem with the back three because they're still our Championship back three.
Yeah, we'll talk about the back three in just a minute. We've talked about the tactical dimension, about how Gary O'Neill did adjust his team's formation and tactics successfully because Bournemouth did outplay us and they were the deserved winners. So let's hear a review from Kirk from the Cherries Red Army podcast.
Wow, what a result for the Cherries, 3-2 versus Nottingham Forest, and that just a week after our 9-0 drubbing at Anfield, where Scott Parker told us that we didn't belong in the Premier League. Well, it looks like a good decision now by the club to have sacked him and given that interim job to Gary O'Neill. We got a good clean sheet midweek 0-0 result against Wolves and went into this game in good spirits. Formation-wise, we set up exactly how we did against Wolves, unchanged, but after 45 minutes... we were brought back down to earth a little bit. It was 2-0 to Nottingham Forest, although the penalty for me was a bit dodgy. It's one of those penalty decisions that if they go for you, you're happy for it, but if they go against you, you're just devastated. So it wasn't looking good at 2-0 half-time, but Gary O'Neill made a formation change, brought on a substitute, and we got back in the game. Philip Billing, he scored the first one to make it 2-1, and he loves a goal at the City ground. And Dom Solanke got off the mark with an overhead kick, with a nick on from the Nottingham Forest defender to take it over Dean Henderson, and at 2-2 it would have been a good draw for the Cherries. I said 1-1 prior to this game, so a good draw it would have been, but we wanted more, and a mistake by the Nottingham Forest defender allowed Dom Solanke to get ahead and square the ball for Jayden Anthony, our young prospect, and there were limbs in the away end for Bournemouth. And 3-2 is a fantastic result for us, and I did think prior to this game it would be a good time to play Nottingham Forest. 21, 22 new players, that takes time to gel, takes time to bed in. Nottingham Forest may be okay in this Premier League, but it's going to have to click for them, and maybe they took it for granted at half-time and they thought this game was over. So tensions between the teams last season, we had some very good football matches, and the first game in this Premier League was also a juicy one as well. And look, a message to Scott Parker, just like one of our contributors on our channel said, we can compete in this Premier League if you believe.
Thank you very much, Kirk. Now, Baz, I want to come back to what we were talking about before we heard from Kirk, which is the back three. And on our WhatsApp group, we've had lots of talk about this just in the hour or so since the match ended, and understandably so. So the main thing is naturally people are focusing upon the fact that our back three, as it is, hasn't got a huge amount of pace. And we've been saying that all season. We know that's a problem. And Kouyate was signed to remedy that, and he looked like he was remedying that for the game and a half that he played, but he's torn his hamstring. We might not see him before the World Cup break. We don't know, maybe that's why Loic Bade has been signed, to try and add that kind of dimension of pace that but he wasn't in the squad today, and Willy Bolly, who was on the bench, is not fast. So there is a bit of an issue. Now, and by the way, just a quick mention to Tom of our podcast, who said they look like they're pulling a caravan the majority of the time, Worrell, Cook and McKenna. Maradon the Midlands, who regular listeners will have heard on our podcast many times, you'll all know that he would call himself a realist. I'd call him a pessimist, but he has said for the last few weeks we cannot play with a back three in the Premier League. Do you have any sympathy with his view?
I think we can't play with two in central midfield in the Premier League. Whether you take that extra player from the front three or from the back three, I don't know. But yeah, we need extra weight in the middle of the park, and the current way we're set up leaves us very, very empty in the middle.
And having signed quite a lot of central midfielders, including players who can sit in that position and hopefully dictate play. So Kouyate with his physical presence and his mobility, Freuler with his nous and experience. We've got players who can do that. We've got Yates with his athleticism, and then O'Brien, who's a worker bee. Now, they're different types of players, all of them, but we've got enough players to do that, haven't we?
Yeah, and I mean, that's when we were on our spree of signing central midfielders, I was like, if we're going to play this same formation that we played last season, where are we going to put them all? Mm-hmm. Now it seems like we need them, and we're still playing the same formation. It doesn't make any sense to me.
So do you think it's a formation thing?
I think, well, if we're playing a formation with only 2 central midfielders, you can't fit 3 in there.
Mm-hmm. So, in your humble opinion, we've heard what Maradona in the Midlands thinks. He would take out one of the centre halves to get the extra man in midfield. So it sounds as though we all agree that we need the extra presence in midfield in the Premier League. So he would take that out of the back line. Would you take it out of the back line, or would you take it out of the front 3?
I'd probably take it out of the front 3, because I think actually we've probably got more talent up front that could deal with having one man fewer.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the argument there as well is, with players like Awoniyi and Dennis, there's more chance of their physical presence enabling them to hold the ball up, which means that, although it's not necessarily their natural game, players like Yates and Freuler and O'Brien can maybe run onto it, etc., etc.
I'm looking at you. You look at the front players we've got. We've got Dennis and Awoniyi who can hold the ball up. We've got Johnson who can hit someone on the break. We've got Gibbs-White and Lingard who can unlock a defence. So, yeah, there's a lot of talent there. So to play 3 small people who are all very, very similar in what they do, as I said, it don't make any sense to me.
So Forest have obviously got a bit of a break now, having had a really punishing, 3 Premier League games in less than a week. It is very, very punishing. In some ways, you'd think it's good, because it means that the team can kind of get used to each other in a match situation. But equally, I'm sure Steve Cooper would say that he'd want to get the players playing, training together first to kind of and work on them tactically. Incidentally, Cooper did say the goals were a consequence of how we played. The goals we conceded, that is, were a consequence of how we played in the second half. So he's not shying away from the fact that it wasn't just that Bournemouth got lucky, it was that they outdid us in all departments. And obviously the momentum change coming after that goal by Billing. So he's not shying away from that. The question being, what are the solutions? And as always happens after a defeat, and particularly a defeat that feels damaging like this one, this feels more damaging than Man City in many, many ways. So naturally now we've got 30,000 football managers on phone-ins, on Twitter, grumbling on their way out of the game and in the pubs, who are saying, well, I could do better than that. So who knows? So we will ponder over that, and in the meantime, let's have a roundup of the transfer news coming from Callum.
Hi, this is Callum with the 1865 news. A busy week for transfers again. Obviously, the window is shut now. It ended with, Loddy was announced after the Spurs game, finally, and then Willy Bolly, Loic Bade and Josh Bowler were all announced on deadline day, with obviously Josh Bowler heading to Olympiacos on loan. Batshuayi fell through from Chelsea and ended up at Fenerbahce, and Sergio Aurier is still expected to join Forest, but when that is, not too sure. And obviously Alex Mighton went out to Sheffield Wednesday on loan. So that was all of the transfers done and dusted in the last week, leaving a very big list of names added to the squad. And then in terms of any other news, Orel Mangala was confirmed to be out with hamstring injury, whether it's days, weeks. Steve Cooper said it shouldn't be too much longer than that. Obviously, the list of injuries with the new signings is it's becoming a bit larger now with Niakate and bits like that. So hopefully they get well soon. Could do with a couple of them back. And yeah, thank you very much. I'll be back with the news again soon.
Thank you very much, Callum. Baz, just to finish off, we've talked about the problems, we've talked about what's happened in the match. We're going to have one of our roundup shows coming up next week to discuss the transfers in the season so far, so I'm sure our panel will get stuck into that. Do you think it's a good thing that we've now got an 8-day break before the Leeds match?
Yeah, I think actually that's probably the best positive out of the last week is we've got this. The modern football managers talk a lot about the patterns of play, and they seem to work off playbooks, and they divide the pitch into certain. When the ball's in this area, these are the moves that you need to be making, so they all the players understand what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to work together. So 8 days to work on that stuff is absolutely vital, because we did look disconnected today. And then this little run of games that we've got coming up next. I mean, yeah, we'd have been overjoyed if we'd taken something from Spurs and Man City, but we knew that this first 5 games of the season were going to be really tough. And then this little run coming up next, these are the ones where we need to pick up points. Mm-hmm. So we need to get the next 8 days right.
Okay, and just as somebody who lives in Leeds, at the start of the season we were discussing about how Leeds had made some good signings, but Jesse March still hadn't won over the Leeds fans. In the first few matches of the season, it seemed as though they were a bit more convinced by him, but obviously they've not done well in the last couple of matches results-wise. So is this a case of, fingers crossed, Leeds will still have some injury problems and Leeds will still be on a bit of a downer, and hopefully there might be something we can get out of that?
From what I can see of them, I don't understand where it's. I think it's as much a getting to know you kind of situation, similar to us, because Jesse March, even though his style is relatively similar to Bielsa, it's different enough that the players are almost starting from scratch. So yeah, they're in a similar position to us.
Okay. All right, well, we'll leave it there for today. So thank you very much to you, Baz. Thank you also to Callum for the news roundup, and thank you to Kirk from the Cherries Red Army podcast for giving us your thoughts. To you, listener, thanks as always for joining us. It would be great if you could take the time to vote for us in the Football Content Awards. You can do that. We are nominated in the Best Club Content Creator category, which is a lot of things to say, a lot of hard C's to say. And you can view the details in our pinned tweet on our Twitter feed, or you can go to the Football Contents Awards website. And the voting closes on Sunday, the 4th of September. So if you're listening to this on Sunday, we'd love it if you'd give us a nod. We'll be back in the week with our roundup show, and then we'll be back again after the Leeds match.
Sports Social Podcast Network.